grade student here at St. Luke's School in Southington. Thank you so much for joining us today. On October 31st, 2023, we began our research on 4 extraordinary pumpkins. Each student had to write a hypothesis on what they thought would happen to the pumpkins over time. An example of a hypothesis with a carved pumpkin with soil and a carved pumpkin without soil is, if a carved pumpkin is placed with soil, then it will rot slower because it's still present in its natural environment. I thought that there was something in the soil that would prevent the pumpkin from rotting quickly. Over time, we all recorded observations and compared them to our hypothesis. At the end of the investigation, we go back and compare the observations to the hypothesis and see what we've learned. Next, let's listen to my friends Sophie R. and Indy on how we set up the experiment.
Good evening, I'm Sophie.
And I'm Indiana.
We are here to tell you about the variables of this pumpkin investigation.
Variables are things that you can change and measure over time. For this investigation, an example variable is the pumpkin carved or not, or is the pumpkin in soil or is it in an empty container?
These are examples of experimental variables. There is also another type called control variables. Control variables are the things that remain the same about the pumpkins during the investigation.
Our control variables were the type and size of pumpkin we used and type of jar we used. All of the jars were also sealed tightly with tape. The carved pumpkins were all carved in the same pumpkin face.
They were also stored in the same environment throughout the investigation, and, if they had soil, there were exactly 3 cups of it from Miss Kelly's backyard in the jars.
Up next, our friends Cassidy and Sophie W. will be explaining some observations that we took on these pumpkins.
Here they are now.
Hi, I'm Sophie.
And I'm Cassidy. Thank you for introducing us, Indy and Sophie.
And we want to tell you about how our pumpkins changed over time.
We have 4 types of pumpkins.
We have carved pumpkin with soil, carved pumpkin without soil, uncarved pumpkin with soil, and uncarved pumpkin without soil.
The first observation we saw was that most of the pumpkins developed a white fungus.
We also found that there was condensation forming around all the pumpkins and their containers. In the next couple weeks, the pumpkins began to change. These are the observations we recorded.
For the carved pumpkin without soil, it has water around it, and the pumpkin remains are floating on top of the water. The water has an orange tint to it from the decomposed pumpkin parts.
And for the carved pumpkin with soil, the stem that got disconnected from the pumpkin is also covered in a white bumpy fungus. The pumpkin itself is covered in a light tint of brown, possibly from the bacteria.
The uncarved pumpkin without soil was very normal for a while, until about a month in. It grew a little bit of a white fungi around, and the condensation formed as the pumpkin began to dry out. But over time, it covered the whole pumpkin with a white fluffy fungus.
The uncarved pumpkin with soil is probably the most normal pumpkin out of the 4. It's been almost over 4 months, and it still looks perfectly normal. That's it for our observations.
Now Krishna and Dante with the conclusion.
Hi, I'm Christian.
And I'm Dante.
Come with us while we talk about the conclusion to our pumpkin investigation.
We've learned that if a pumpkin is carved, it will decompose faster than a pumpkin that is not carved. This is because bacteria and fungi have a greater surface area to grow, and the pumpkin can leak out water that helps the bacteria and fungi grow even faster.
If a pumpkin has no soil, it decomposes faster than a pumpkin with soil.
We were surprised by this because we thought soil would help the pumpkin rot faster because soil is full of bacteria and fungi. It could be that the soil was not damp enough at the beginning of this investigation.
It was interesting to watch the white fungi and bacteria grow all over the pumpkins. Each week, most of them got smaller.
We had hoped that some of the pumpkin seeds would sprout, but they were also covered in fungi and did not sprout.
Sometimes experiments surprise you, and you learn something new.
Up next, check out our news program and hear from the experts on rotting pumpkins.
Hello, and welcome to the St. Luke's 7th grade news channel. Here to talk to us about pumpkins, all the way from Mexico, our first guest. What is your name? What do you do and what do you study?
My name is Jackson and I am a farmer. I live in Mexico and my farm is a chinampa, a floating farm surrounded by water. It is about 914 meters. In the summer I grow some things such as maize, beans, squash, tomatoes, chili peppers, and pumpkins.
Pumpkins? I am aware that they rot easily. And is the rotting process important for your farm?
The water around the chinampa provides moisture which helps decompose the organic waste naturally. This is a part of why pumpkins were first found in Mexico.
How do you keep your soil healthy?
The water that surrounds it provides my farm with the moisture good for helping decompose plants and fertilize the soil.
How does the process of decomposing work?
Plants and other crops break down carbon dioxide and mineral nutrients such as nitrogen. There are also bacteria and fungi that feed on the material called decomposers. They are the secret of decomposing.
Do you have any other decomposing tips?
Well, in the spirit of Halloween, we like to carve pumpkins because not only is it festive, it helps them rot.
Well, thank you for your time, Jackson.
No problem. If you ever want to learn more about decomposing or pumpkins, you'll know where to find me.
Our next guest is a geologist who is here to talk to us about dirt and soil. Where do you work and what do you do?
Hi, my name is Dr. Jados. I mainly work at government agencies, private companies, and nonprofit institutions, but sometimes I like to work in the lab. Right now, we are studying a dirt sample from our dig site, and it has traces of pumpkins. We are seeing if pumpkins will help with the plant growth.
What's the difference between dirt and soil?
Well, soil contains dead matter like decaying grass, leaves, pine needles, and dead animals. Soil can sometimes contain traces of vegetables such as pumpkins, whereas dirt is made of broken down rocks and sediments.
How is dirt and soil made?
Soil is formed through weathering combined with the action of wind, water, and climate. This process is then combined with dead matter like pumpkins to make the soil rich. Dirt is made over hundreds of years and is made up of tiny rock particles. Dirt can be made into soil when it is mixed with dead matter.
How does rock play into your work?
Well, rot plays into my work because depending on how much things rot determines on how rich the soil is. To get richer soil, I would recommend chopping up some vegetable scraps and putting it into your soil. Doing this will add nutrients the plants need to grow and prosper.
All right, that's all my questions. Thanks for coming.
You're welcome.
Our last guest is here to talk about the garbage we all make and what happens to it. Greetings. Can you tell us your name and what you do for a living?
My name is Jacob Muzinski. I am a garbologist. I study the management of garbage.
Why is garbology important?
Garbology is important because it is a major source of information about garbage that people make and how we manage it. The removal of garbage has a positive impact on human health. Garbage left behind can become a habitat for disease-carrying pests, which is why it's important to manage our garbage.
Our class did a pumpkin rotting experiment. Why is it important for us to understand how things rot?
It is important because decomposers help make sure that materials in the environment get used over and over again. It helps us understand about garbage. We've seen that molds and bacteria break down dead organisms and once living materials into tiny pieces of matter they can eat.
What is the importance of landfill management?
Landfills are located, designed, operated, and monitored to ensure compliance with federal regulations. They are also designed to protect the environment from contaminants which may be present in the waste stream.
What can people do to cut down how much goes into a landfill?
People can compost things like fruit or vegetable scraps.
Thanks for tuning in.
Did you know the scientist who discovered the law of conservation of mass was beheaded?
What happened to his head?
It decomposed.
But it was not destroyed. Did you know that when a chemical reaction occurs, the matter involved is not created or destroyed? Instead, it is simply changed, and any substance that is perceived to have disappeared or been made is just seen differently. You can tell this by the fact that the mass of all the matter before the reaction is equal to the mass after the reaction occurs.
In the pumpkin jars, the pumpkins decomposed. They leaked fluid, released water vapor, grew bacteria and fungi, and deteriorated. Did you know that we weighed the pumpkins every week? The mass of the pumpkins in their containers stayed the same, which meant that the water was just being recycled. Speaking of recycled, up next we can learn about how water was recycled in the pumpkin containers.
Hello, my name is Ryan and this is Evan, and we are going to talk about how the water cycle is related to pumpkin investigation.
Did you know pumpkins rotting in jars are related to the water cycle? As the pumpkins rot, moisture is released from the pumpkin. This water from the pumpkin rises up the container towards the lid. This is the process of evaporation. Condensation happens when the water vapor collects into droplets. You can see this as it builds up on the inside walls in the lid of the jar.
Finally, when the condensation droplets get larger, they stream down the sides of the jar or fall from the lid. Did you know this is due to gravity?
The condensation collects and rolls down to the bottom of the jar, slowly or more rapidly, depending on the size of the drops of water. Did you know that this is the precipitation stage of the water cycle?
The process is happening all the time. That is why we call it a cycle. It has no beginning or ending. Up next, you'll hear about the carbon and nitrogen cycles.
Hi, I'm Julia, and this is Anicia. Did you know that you need carbon and nitrogen in your everyday life?
Plants and animals need nitrogen in a certain form. Nitrogen cycles throughout the atmosphere, rotting organic materials and through plant roots.
Did you know that bacteria and fungi in soil help decompose organic matter and convert nitrogen in a special form plants need?
When animals eat plants, the nitrogen is used by the animal and humans to build protein.
If we had seedlings growing in these pumpkins containers, we would have a complete nitrogen cycle.
Did you know that the carbon cycle is happening all around you? Plants use carbon dioxide for photosynthesis and make oxygen for us to breathe.
Did you know rotting pumpkins are releasing carbon dioxide? The carbon cycle would be happening in the pumpkin containers if they were growing pumpkin sprouts.
We hope you've enjoyed learning about our pumpkin investigation. We made so many connections to all of our middle school science classes. We learned how to design an experiment, how things rot over time, and the chemistry that is happening inside of the containers. Thanks for watching.